Hello, this is T-Cat from T-Cat's Deep Vinyl Tracks. I'm doing a video today to go over the Warner Reprise Loss Leader series that came out back in 1969, went through the whole 70s decade and ended up in the 80s. And I want to go through some of the ones I own, why they're important to me, and show you what I have in my library, which obviously I'll be holding up, and all the others. There's probably, I'm not sure how many are missing, probably about 8 or 9 that I'm missing out of my collection that I would like to eventually get, but I will show a picture of those. Now, if you don't know what the Warner Reprise Loss Leaders are, basically what they are a collection of different songs from different bands that were on the Warner Reprise labels. There were quite a few different artists that were on these labels. They started out, of course, Reprise was founded by Frank Sinatra, and around 1967 they decided to start signing more bands that were a little more under the rock umbrella than the easy listening or early jazz that was originally signed to the label. Warner Brothers and Reprise started signing up a lot of different folk singers, singer-songwriters, rock groups that were involved with more of the blues style based rock, and they were signing these people on like crazy. People like Frank Zappa, Jimi Hendrix, Joni Mitchell, all kinds of bands like this, all kinds of artists like this. And originally these Loss Leader albums were to help push these, to help promote these artists, to get more people to listen to them. And so what they would do on these collections is they would mix some hits in there along with some of the artists that were a little harder to market because certain radio stations wouldn't play their music, or they weren't as popular as they felt they should be, and a lot of them ended up becoming quite famous and popular because of these collections that were put out. Now, the way you obtain these was not in a regular store, but in the inner sleeves of a lot of the albums that Warner and Reprise put out, they would put in something like this. And on one side it had some examples of the different collections they had to offer, and it would list all the different tracks and everything that was on each one of these albums. And on the other side of the inner sleeve they explained what all of this was, their reasoning behind it, and then an order blank which you could fill out. And most of these Warner Reprise Loss Leaders albums were dual albums. They had 2 discs in them, so you get 2 discs of music, and they would charge $1 for a disc. So most of these ended up costing $2 a piece, which was pretty good considering the music they got on here. Even back then, that was relatively cheap. So I remember the reason these things became so important to me was because I remember listening to, actually my sister had a copy of the Doobie Brothers' What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits album, and it had one of these inner sleeves in it, and I would sit there and read all the different artists on there thinking, wow, I would really love to be able to order these. But back then, I was lucky to be able to get $2 together, and my parents probably wouldn't have been too happy with me doing orders like that through the mail. So it always ended up just being a dream and a wish that I could order a few of these. Now back then I figured there must have only been like maybe 5 or 10 albums that they put out according to the lists that were on these inner sleeves. As it turns out, there were quite a few more of those. And when I started collecting vinyl right from the beginning, I remember finding one of these collections or samplers, or whatever you want to call them, a compilation, and it was the one entitled Limo. And I bought that like at the very first when I started collecting vinyl. And ever since then, I've been on the search for them, trying to find the best some of the ones in the best condition that I can. So I've been on the hunt for these ever since I've started. I still haven't got them all, and I hope with this I can show you which ones I have got and which ones I'm still trying to get, and hopefully you can understand why owning this entire set's important to me. It's kind of a silly thing, but it does harken back to a nostalgic issue. So anyway, to start out, these started out in the year 1969. The very first one was called the 1969 Warner Reprise Songbook. Warner Reprise signed on the Grateful Dead as one of their first hipster bands. They called them hipster bands. Nobody else would sign them on to a label, and so Warner Reprise did that. And along with that, they started signing other artists, like I mentioned before, Frank Zappa, Jimi Hendrix, artists that were having a hard time marketing their music. This first one collects a bunch of these different artists. People like Randy Newman, Joni Mitchell, Arlo Guthrie, Van Morrison, The Kinks, The Fugs, Tiny Tim, The Mothers of Invention, Wildman Fisher, The Pentangle, Neil Young, Jethro Tull, Jimi Hendrix. Those are all artists that are included in this first collection. And throughout the years, these collections were always full of great songs by these artists. Now, the songs weren't always necessarily hits. A lot of these were deep tracks, songs that people wouldn't normally hear, that they hoped would help push the album themselves forward. Here's the back side of that first one. And in the inner sleeve, or on the inside the gatefold, most of these had gatefolds, you would see these multiple pages that would explain, it would show the albums of the artist, it would explain a little bit about the artist and about the song, and it would go through both records, telling you about the songs and about the artists that were included on each one. And so this one being the first, it ended up being quite a very popular album, and people started ordering it, and the demand for it ended up being a lot bigger. So right away they decided to release a second one. This one was called the 1969 Warner Reprise Record Show. The first one had quite a bit of variety on it. This one was a little less eclectic than the first one, and it featured a little more straightforward rock and roll. You had artists like Fats Domino, again the Fugs was on here, Grateful Dead made it to this one, Joni Mitchell, The Mothers of Invention, Jethro Tull, Neil Young, the Everly Brothers, Jimi Hendrix Experience. And these are the kind of songs that you would find on these. Cinnamon Girl with Neil Young, which everybody basically knows that song now, but back then that was considered a deep track. The Grateful Dead's Doing That Rag, Jeff and Maria Moldauer, All Bowed Down, the Everly Brothers, Empty Boxes, Doug Kershaw, Son of a Louisiana Man, David Blue, Atlanta Farewell, Arlo Guthrie, Every Hand in the Land, and the Blue Velvet Van, Blues from Waitin'. That's just side one of this collection. But not necessarily the most popular tracks that the artist was putting out, though they did tend to add in a couple of hits to help with the sales of these. Most of them were unheard of tracks. Now, by this time, Warner Brothers and Reprise knew that they had something going here because of the popularity of these records. In 1969, they released a third one. This one was just called October 10th, 1969. And this third album ended up only being a single disc because they were still kind of up in the air about how they wanted to market these. This time, they put the bios and the song descriptions on the back cover instead of in a separate sleeve, since it wasn't a gatefold. And of course the inner sleeve was still advertising their basic records. And of course back then they were on these green labels. Now I've noticed my phone tends to pick up cat hairs really easily. I can look at them and not see them, but when I show them on here, they show up, so don't worry about that. Those are not scratches. Those are just some of the joys of owning furry critters. So again, this one features Frank Zappa. It features the Kinks, Eric Anderson, Norman Greenbaum, Spirit in the Sky, the Mike Post Coalition, bands like that. Some of these you've heard of, some of them probably not. And at this point, they decided to start turning it into a regular thing, and they would start asking $1 per record. So that last one I showed you, October 10th, 1969, was a single disc, and it only cost $1. So they were going full force at this time. The next one, they decided to start calling them the Loss Leaders, as they weren't really making a profit at only $1 a record. But they were a great promotional tool, and this really worked for them. So they started making more of them. 1970, they went back to the 2 LP sets and released one called The Big Ball. So that's from 1970. It's centered more on rock and roll, and like-minded songs were kind of featured together, so that one side would have like rock and roll on it, another side would have like singer-songwriters would be featured, another side would have more original and boundary-pushing artists. And so this is kind of the format they started following a little bit closer as time went on, trying to focus on certain acts for each different side. Also in 1970, they released this one, Schlagers, another 2 LP. This one was more middle-of-the-road acts that were featured on this one. It had, more easier listening music. Artists like Frank Sinatra, Trini Lopez, Petula Clark, and a few folk singers. Those were the ones that were featured on this one more than, and made it a little more lighthearted. They not only wanted to feature these kind of collaborations, but they wanted to use like guests that would put together these collaborations. And the next one that they released in 1970 was put together by Frank Zappa. That one's called Zappéd. Not Zapped, but Zappéd. Now there were 2 issues of this particular one. There was this one, and there's another one that I will show a picture of somewhere over here. You'll see that. These 2 albums are almost the same, but there are 4 tracks that are different. they had the same exact lineup as far as artists, but 4 of the tracks were changed for some reason. Now this particular one is a little bit different looking on the inner sleeve, because it was designed more by Frank Zappéd than it was anybody else, and it was on his Bizarre label instead of the Warner Brothers label, which was also on Reprise. This one featured artists that were on Frank Zappa's label, like Alice Cooper, who worked with Zappa back then. You also got Lord Buckley, Tim Buckley, Wildman Fisher, Captain Beefheart. You got the GTOs, which was a band that Frank Zappa helped promote. Different bands like this. This was only a single album, so you could buy this for $1 back then. This one is a little bit harder to find. This one is known as the Collage album. The other one that just has the picture of Frank Zappa on the cover is not noted as anything particular, but that's how you can tell the difference. This was the Collage album. So yes, I would eventually like to be able to get both versions. So since I have the Collage version already, I'd like to be able to find the other one just to make it all complete. Next one in line was also released in 1970, and that one is called Looney Tunes and Merrie Melodies. This one is unique in a way because it's actually a 3-disc set instead of a 2-disc set, so of course they charged $3 for it since it's $1 a record. This is the only 3-disc album in the set, and it's the first one in the series that I don't have yet. This one features some radio commercials, and it runs the entire gamut of the Warner Brothers artists. Probably is the most popular set out there, and I don't know if it's because of the cover and the tie-in to the Warner Brothers cartoons or what it was, but it does have quite a good mix of artists on it. Finally, in 1971, they kept on releasing more of these. The first one they released was another single disc. I don't know if it was to balance out the triple disc that they just released, but this one was a single disc called Non-Dairy Creamer. Now, as you can see, and this is the interesting thing about the Warner Brothers Reprise collections, is there's nowhere on here that tells you that that's what it is. So it's always kind of hard if you find these in the store now, in the used records. It's kind of hard to determine which ones they are and which ones aren't, which ones are the Reprise Warner Brothers collections, other than knowing what to be looking for. Non-Dairy Creamer, this single disc again had the bios and everything on the back cover, and it was still coming on the green Warner Brothers label. There's nothing really unique about this one other than the fact that it's probably features more heavy rock on it. You got Tony Joe White, Peter Green, who was previously from Fleetwood Mac. You've got Little Feat, Curved Air, Brownsville Station. So bands like this were featured on this one. Also in 1971, seen the release of this one called Hot Platters. This one's designed to look more like a takeout menu or a diner menu, and this one, the booklet came separately. It wasn't attached to the middle, and it's still coming on the green labels, as you see. there. You can see not very often they would list the actual tracks on the record somewhere, but this one they did. It might be kind of hard to see here, but here each side has a different title. Like side 1 is Rock Salad. You have Deep Purple Strange Kind of Woman, Red Eye Beginning to End, T-Rex, Hot Love. Side 2 was Stout Hearted Stew. Featured Gordon Lightfoot, Randy Newman, more of your singer-songwriters. Side 3 was Tin Casserole, and had artists like the Beach Boys, the Kinks, and Rosebud. And side 4 was the Blues Plate Special, which featured more blues-oriented bands like Ry Cooder, and interestingly enough, Ronnie Millsap. Mother Earth is also on here, so give you a good idea of how eclectic these collections could be and how they were organizing them a little bit better as time went on. The next one is another single disc platter from 1971, and it's called Together. This is another one I don't have in my collection, but it is the last single disc that Warner Brothers would feature. And just like Non-Dairy Creamer before it, it centered more around the heavy rockers. 1972 seen the release of the whole Burbank catalog. This one was collected and put together with the notes written by none other than Barry Hansen, who was otherwise known as Dr. Demento. And from this point forward, Dr. Demento would actually oversee a lot of these collections. He would take a break somewhere along the way, but down here it says, much of the world is sometimes covered by darkness. I don't know what that means, but this one features more stable artists and also featured some newer artists, at least at the time they were considered newer artists, like America and Sills and Crofts. And this one also features some old spots from radio shows. So overall, the album starts to sound more like it was all presented over a radio program. So that kind of ties the whole album together. Then you have 1972's Middle of the Road. This one, of course, centered more on the middle of the road sound again, more popular sounds. This one is a later pressing because it's on the white Warner Brothers label. But again, like some of the others, each one of the sides had different titles. But and the music was organized more towards sound. Like side 3 of this one has Frank Sinatra, Sills and Crofts, Todd Rundgren, the Beach Boys, America, Merrie Travers, and T-Rex. But again, like I said, this is more the middle of the road sound, less of a hard rock sound, more of a radio style sound. Another one in 1972, which was a big year for them apparently, is this Burbank. Burbank has more variety and starts to include more soul bands in the mix, along with the other singer-songwriters and heavy rockers that the others were featuring. Then, also in 1972, Days of Wine and Vinyl. Again, there's nothing on the front that tells you it's a Warner Brothers Reprise collection or anything like that. You only know that by knowing what to look for. In fact, this one doesn't have the title on it anywhere except for on the spine of the record itself. Still coming out on the green labels. and it focused more on folk rock and singer-songwriters. Next one to come along was this Appetizers. This is 1973 now. This one was centered more around rockers, and also started to show an emergence of southern rock. You know, you're getting bands like Little Feat, Paul Butterfield is on here, Bert Jansch, Alice Cooper, John Cale, Todd Rundgren, The Incredible String Band, Still I Span, Deep Purple, Wet Willie, Flo and Eddie, the Beach Boys, and Foghat. Also, 1973, All Singing, All Talking, All Rocking. This one has clips from Warner Brothers movies interspersed throughout it. Again, there's the inner sleeve, or the gatefold, which all the gatefolds look like this up to this point. And the multi-pages talking about each of the bands. This one features the Allman Brother Band, Bonnie Raitt, Maria Moldauer, a lot of the regulars, the Doobie Brothers, Jesse Colin Young, Tim Buckley, Peter Yarrow, Gene Parsons, and then you got little clips from different movies throughout on this particular one. 1974 comes around, and we've got another double disc. Hard Goods is the name of this one. This one at least has some of the artists mentioned on the front, like Still I Span, Deep Purple, the Marshall Tucker Band, Greg Almond, Robin Trower, and it also features a song that wasn't available anywhere else by Neil Young and Graham Nash called The War Song. This song was never featured on any other album except for this one until the recent release of the Archive series. Another thing that this particular one made this one unique from the others is it's the first one to get rid of the little booklet on the inside. Now everything was listed on the inside the gatefold, and like so. No extra pages. That would help save on the cost of the actual album. This one centers on the influx of hard rock with some singer and songwriter artists. Okay, that's it. I thought there was something else I needed to add to that, but that was it. The next one to come along in 1974 was a record called Peaches. Now, Peaches takes tracks from the Capricorn label and features a lot of southern rock artists. This is one I haven't been able to get yet, but one that I would really like to get. But it, like I say, centers around Marshall Tucker Band, Allman Brothers, bands like this that were more southern rockers, and the Capricorn label pretty much featured those type of artists. Then in 1974, a regular Warner Brothers Reprise collection came out called Deep Ear. There were music of all styles on this one, and it's centered more around the deeper tracks, having very few hits on it. 1975 saw the release of The Force. This one centered more on rock and pop and started to feature some funk. We're seeing funk starting to creep in on some of these collections. And now we're also on the Burbank label. The green label's pretty much disappeared by this time. But this one features Van Morrison, Tower of Power. You also hear some of the regular artists that are on these starting to move towards that style, that funky style of music as disco started to close in. 1975 also saw the release of All Meat. This one centered more on soul and funk artists, and these were added to the mix of the regulars. We also seen Peaches Number 2, released in 1975, which was some more Capricorn artists and Southern rock. So the first one was popular enough, they released a second volume. Also in 1975, this one called I Didn't Know They Still Made Records Like This. Kind of an interesting cover. Probably the most strangest looking cover out of all of them. This is the back side. It's all, you know, it's all fun and games until somebody gets caught. This one had more hits added to the collection, and where the others were centered more around the deeper cuts, this particular one had centered more around the hits being added to the different samplers and with the deep cuts. And it's more middle of the road centered. Next comes The Works. This one is a little tore up on the front cover, but the records themselves are in good shape. This one is more rock centered and features bands like The Meters, Little Feat, Commander Cody. Richard Pryor is starting to show up on some of these albums. Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart do a collaboration together. It's The Works. 1976 saw the release of one called Supergroup. Now, Supergroup doesn't have the title of the album on the cover at all anywhere, not even on the spine. But that's what it opens up to. You get artists' renditions of all the different acts that are on this particular collection. Emmylou Harris, Slade, the Doobie Brothers, Michael Franks. You get more funk with Bootsy's Rubber Band, Elvin Bishop Blues, George Benson going to the jazz side of things, Leon and Mary Russell, and some of the regulars, and a few of them that you probably never heard of before. 1976 also seen the release of The People's Record. This one is a return to more of a variety, and it has a little bit of everything spread out through all the songs, a lot of different styles of songs. Then in 1977, the release of Cookbook, which focuses more on rhythm and blues and soul artists that were being famous back then. 1977 also seen the release of Limo, which was the first one that I had ever bought out of this collection. And this one just happened to have the color catalog inside of it, which shows some of the different titles that are out there and how you could order them. I haven't seen that catalog in any of the others that I've gotten, so at least I was able to get that one from there. This one focused on diversity, but mostly veering away from disco, strangely enough. This series did tend to stay away from the disco genre for the most part. And it's also the last of the Dr. Demento collections for quite a while. Now, he would do at least one other one that I know of later on. In 1978, the release of Collectus Interuptus. This one also still tries to avoid disco as much as possible, but it does delve quite deeply into funk and has a lot of variety, and even starts to add some punk artists. Also 1979, Pumping Vinyl. This one has a huge variety on it. Nicolette Larson, Michael Franks, Rose Royce, Thin Lizzy. Thin Lizzy's title song on here is Jailbreak. So again, deeper tracks. You also get Devo, Jimmy Cliff, Leon Russell, Captain Beefheart, Bruce Coburn, Arlo Guthrie. So some regulars and some new artists. Next is 1979 again, A La Carte. That's the name of this one. A La Carte is a little bit more dance oriented, but still manages to have a lot of variety on it overall. And it's funny, I look at this the first side here, I don't recognize any of them. Junior Walker, Adam Mitchell, Robert Palmer is on here, the Gibson Brothers, the Sanford Townsend Band, Climax Blues Band. So again, still quite a bit of variety, which most of these did have. Coming up next in 1979 was the release of Monsters. Monsters was featured a lot of new wave and punk bands, and that's what the music tended to be moving towards at that point. These things were starting to creep into the mix of variety, with disco completely finally leaving the mix. And it would also be the last of the Dr. Demento collections. Next up, 1980, Eclipse. Again, no booklet in the middle, but all the information's on the inside the gatefold itself. Price at this point was going up to $3, even though this was only a 2-disc set. The price was going up to $3. Provides a mix of the 70s in review, and also features a lot of new artists. You get the song by the Ramones, I Want You Around. Talking Head Drugs is on this. The Corgis, If I Had You. Plus you get some of the older artists like Leo Sayer, Tom Johnston, who had gone solo from the Doobie Brothers at this point. Van Morrison Troubadours, as he's moving towards more of his 80s sound. So that's Eclipse. Also in 1980, saw the release of Troublemakers. Troublemakers is centered more around punk bands and new wave bands. They get the center stage on this, but it would also end up being the last official, I say official, Loss Leader album that would be released. But it's got quite a nice variety on it. That was the bands that were starting to become big in the 1980s. But the archaic ordering system was starting to get people down. They didn't like having to wait 6 to 8 weeks for a record to come in the mail. And music videos were starting to take over, and people were starting to lose interest in these kind of things. So that seemed basically the end of the official releases in that series, even though Warner Brothers did release a few other promotional albums that hinted towards the Loss Leader collections. Now, there was one that's a little out of place from all the other ones, and that's this one, called Music with 58 Musicians, Volume 1. The interesting thing about this one is it featured ECM artists, jazz artists. ECM and Warner Brothers met an agreement so that ECM records would be distributed through Warner Brothers. and that's what this particular one was supposed to represent. And it is considered a loss leader, even though it's not mentioned as being a loss leader anywhere on the jacket or anywhere else. It shows a collaboration of a lot of different jazz artists, and has quite a write-up on all the different artists inside the inner sleeve. Really nice jazz collection. A little bit harder to find. Now, there were two later CDs that were also released, which of course I had neither one of them. These were released as promos. They were not for sale. The first one was called Warner Brothers Records Presents Loss Leaders Revisited. It was released in 1995 on CD only, and it was only pressed 3,500 copies of it. It was issued as a promo and featured bands like the Flaming Lips, Mr. Bungle, Deftones, Soul Coughing, Sunvolt, and several more. And then this was also another Lost Leaders revival CD was released called Warner Brothers Records Presents Lost Leaders Revisited, released in 2009, and it was also a promo only, not for sale, and it featured bands like the Dead Weather, Tegan and Sarah, REM, and Regina Spektor. Okay, so that's it for all of the Warner Brothers Lost Leaders albums. I know this was quite a long video, and I knew it was going to end up being a long one. I hope I didn't lose too many of you, but I always felt it was important to get out there why I was interested in these and why I'm searching for them, hoping that somebody out there has a lead on one. You know, they weren't a lot of money, and they're still, you know, not worth a whole lot of money, but it's just important that I'm very interested in trying to get that entire collection filled. So this is also the first part of probably a 2 or 3 part series I'm doing on the compilation albums that I have. I hope the other ones won't be quite this long, because I don't have any particular label collections like this. But I am definitely interested in this collection and trying to, eventually hoping to find the entire collection, and every once in a while I do happen to run into one just out of the blue, so it does happen. So maybe someday I'll have them all, but it would just be nice to say I've got the entire set. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope there's a lot of interest in this kind of thing. I've noticed there are other people that have talked about the Warner Brothers Lost Leaders, but I kind of wanted to make it clear as to what they were, what this whole series consisted of, and why it's important to me in the first place. So anyway, thank you for watching, thank you for having patience, and we'll be talking to you soon. Thank you.